Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, an interview format podcast where I, your host, Mark Ducano, talk to estimable figures of standing in the comedy community in a tete-a-tete, not unlike the Frost-Nixon interviews, but without the insight, gravitas, or ideally, inadvertent admissions of guilt. My guest this episode hit the stand-up comedy circuit hard, performing 100 spots in her first year, just in time to enter a global pandemic. Since then, she's been a podcaster, creating the wonderful Comedy Arcade. She's a broadcaster with fellow comic Rich Wilson on Islington Radio, and a promoter of her own comedy shows across London. Comedian Vix Leyton. Hello.
Hiya. How are you?
I'm great. How you been? You okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, so much for coming on. It's fantastic to have you.
I'm delighted. I saw the posting go up recently and then I hadn't heard from you and I was hurt. I couldn't believe that I hadn't heard. I was like, oh no, I'm not in the A-list. Okay. All right. Oh, you have other friends. I see. I get it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I've been seeing other comedians.
Yeah, I suspected as much looking at your social media, but I didn't want to believe that. But no, then you asked.
Of
and
course,
here I am.
of course. I knew straight away. I said, I'm going to do this. And there's a couple of names that popped into my head straight away, including yourself. But then also I was like, what if they say no? I'll be crushed.
Oh, no, we wouldn't say no. We'd leave you on red.
So, yeah. Fine.
I'm here now. I might as well answer your questions.
Yeah, let's jump in some questions and change this subject. Okay, so let me ask you then, how long now have you been doing stand-up?
3 years? Yeah, just about 3 years. Obviously, 2 of those in and out of lockdown.
Yeah.
So not ideal circumstances for comedy. So my first year, I did 100 gigs in a year.
Yes.
So I really got into it. So I saw a lot of comedy. I saw a lot of open micers and a lot of comedians at all kinds of levels. So it was a really interesting way to start. And I would recommend that to people to set yourself the challenge. Maybe don't go as hard as I did, because towards the end, I still had about 2 weeks and I had about 16 gigs to do. So I was like, where can I double up? Yeah, it was such an education though. You get over the sort of weirdness of it quite quickly, and you get over the weirdness of it being only a few people in the audience at the smaller gigs. So I was doing every gig to hit this arbitrary target that I'd set.
Yeah.
Because a promoter that I didn't like very much at an open mic night told me you couldn't consider yourself a comedian until you'd done at least 100 gigs. So I thought, right, I'll show you. I'll do 100 gigs. So I did my 100 in March 2020 at
perfect timing.
VMS, which is when I did my first gig. So I went back to Tom Tuck. I was like, you gave me my first gig. I'd really love to do my 100th with you. So I got to be part of a phenomenal lineup, because ACMS is one of the coolest, most coveted, weirdest gigs in town. So I was the one person telling my silly little stories about my silly little self, while everybody else was doing really interesting experimental stuff. Like, yeah, Jos Norris is just clearing up his spoons. I'm going to talk about me. COVID had just sort of, it was starting to reach a critical mass in the press, because obviously there've been whispers about it for a good few weeks. But it wasn't our problem at the time. It felt like something that, that's a bit of a worry, because so many comedians that night did jokes about it.
Yeah.
Just like Sean Doxey had a dress made of surgical gloves and did a whole thing with hand sanitizer, and it was really, really funny. Obviously, that did not last long. Because we didn't know. So we were partly going, do you think there's going to be a lockdown for a couple of weeks? But we were also all talking about Edinburgh Fringe. Yeah. So I think about 2 or 3 days later, Melbourne Comedy Festival got cancelled. Yeah. And then it started to feel quite real for comedians. Like, gigs started to be rescheduled just for precautions. Just like, for the sake of safety, we'll just make them in May. It'll all be sorted by then. And a couple of weeks later, lockdown kicked in. So I completed my 100 gigs. I was raring to go. I was very excited about my first Edinburgh Fringe, had my venue with Just the Tonic. Terrible idea, by the way. That solo show, mine, would have been absolutely dreadful. I didn't have 10. I certainly didn't have 45. So I'm not saying the pandemic came at the right time for me, because there's no right time for a pandemic. But I'm glad I'm doing it this year and not then. I'm very glad that I had that 2 years time to think about my life choices and build up some material. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, absolutely. And there's a lot in what you've said that I want to come back to. But first thing I'm going to mention is that the last show I managed to see in 2020 in March was I'd just come back from the Leicester Comedy Festival and the Vaults Festival was on. And I went there and I managed to see the last show of 2020 up until that point, until pandemic, was Mark Watson, who was doing his
We might have been there together. I saw him do Vaults. But yeah, I think it was a little bit earlier. I think it was at the start of the festival. Because I went to see something before his show on, I think, one of the last few days that I reviewed for Funny Women. Yeah, then it all went away.
All the tickets I had booked on after him were all done, cancelled, and that was it.
Yeah,
and then everything went online.
A show called This Can't Be It, and it was like, we've got a lot more in store for us, Mark. You're absolutely right. This isn't it. This isn't the worst that it gets. Yeah.
So tell me, what about this influence that Mark Watson had on you in your starting comedy?
Well, I was talking to somebody about this earlier on, actually. He was probably one of the main comedians that I first started to see regularly live.
Yeah.
So back at university, I used to go to the university comedy night, and it would be Jared Christmas, Al Pitcher, and really like decent names now, but at the time they're just on the uni circuit because I went to university way longer ago than I'd like to admit, but yeah, like 20 years ago. And it's brilliant they're all still going, to be honest. Well done them. That was around the time you were supposed to start comedy, so I was there drinking my £6 red wine that was rotting my liver and soul. And then Glee Club in Cardiff was like, if you didn't just want to go to the same old pubs, that was one of the few things. Everyone was so excited when Glee Club opened, and we had a proper comedy club in Cardiff. So me and my best mate at the time used to go every sort of weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And Watson was on. It's phenomenal now to think of it, that we used to pay so little, and it would be usually Mark, Russell Howard, John Richardson, Ed Byrne, Lucy Porter is the only female act I can remember of that era. I think she was the only one going with any level of club success. Sorry if there are others that I've forgotten, but Rob Deering, like that was the caliber of acts. And I just absolutely fell in love with Mark Watson's style of comedy. He was doing it in the Welsh accent at the time as well. So we kind of felt like he was our own. We were all tricked by Mark Watson, but I've just about forgiven him now after 20 years. But and my first ever PR job, I was given one job for the corporate party that we did every year for the partners that we worked on. And my job was to book the entertainment. So I shamelessly used that opportunity to book Mark Watson as the comedian. I had one job, and I was like, what would I like?
Yeah,
I would like to see Mark Watson in a small gig that I pay for, because we will immediately become friends. Obviously, I had it all planned out in my head. 23, I was like, me and Mark Watson, because that's the beauty of a good comedian. You feel like they're talking to you about stuff that pertains to you. Like Sean Walsh is exactly the same. I genuinely, I'm sitting there and like, this is for me. We get on so well because I'm relating really strongly to this, but that's why they're so bloody good at it, because everyone is. It's not, you're not special. We're all experiencing these things together. But I was like, we're going to be best friends immediately. I can't wait for this to happen. He absolutely took the roof off. It was such a good show.
Oh yeah.
Like he'd done his research as well, because so he knew all about the brand. He knew our CEO's name. He improvised a little song about our CEO that he still talks about now, because we're still in touch, and he still remembers that. But we didn't become best friends, sadly. He came to do a job that he did. I was too shy to basically say words, to be honest. Didn't have anything. Didn't have a lot about me that night. I was quite stressed. I was doing general admin stuff because I was a PR assistant, so I was running around mad all night anyway. Barely had a chance to see anyone, let alone befriend them on a meaningful level. And we were following each other on Twitter then afterwards anyway, just I think, because he's a polite person. That's a courtesy. I think he followed me back on Twitter, which I forgot about. So that was 15, 16 years ago.
Wow, okay.
Completely forgot.
Yeah.
that he was following me on Twitter, I was following him on Twitter. That was irrelevant at the time.
Yeah.
Carried on seeing comedy, moved to London, got to see a lot more comedy. It was quite exciting. All this time I was developing a fear of public speaking. So in the meantime, I was quite show-offy as a teenager. I did GCSE drama. So my parents would say I was a precocious nightmare of a girl, because I was always putting on my own shows. I wrote the music, I directed music. It was, I'd go door to door to the neighbours, fleecing them for money to pay for tickets to see these extravaganzas. I was the worst. If we'd had the money for me to go to Stagecoach, I would have been a Stagecoach little prick. But unfortunately, that was not, fortunately, that was not to be. But yeah, over the years, I started to get really nervous about having to do anything that involves speaking in front of people. Yeah. Even meetings. So it was just getting like the reach of it got deeper and deeper. It started to be, I'd be quite uncomfortable at the idea of going in front of people, but I'd ultimately get over it and do it. Sure. And as the years went on, it just became kind of psychosomatic. So my eyelid would twitch, my knees would be trembling, like the stress of having to speak in front of even 4 or 5 people would just wipe me out. It'd be white noise in my head. So I'd usually get through it and people would enjoy it and they'd say, oh, that was great. But I hated it so much that I didn't want to do it. And I worked in a job at the time where I worked in startup tech as a PR person. So I was one of the few women at senior level in the kind of startups I was working in. So I got asked to be on panels all the time. And I was too scared to do them. But then I go to conferences and all I do is whinge that the panels are all men. So I was part of the problem. I was not part of the solution. So I made a New Year's resolution to get over my fear of public speaking, to be able to speak at corporate panels and be the change that I was demanding to see in the world from others. So I did the Funny Women course, yes. Lynn Parker's course. It was like a half day. And it was at the Grout Show, and I made some incredible friends in that room as well that I'm still friends with now. It was such a brilliant, I cannot for the life of me think of £50 better spent than I spent that day in that room, because the lessons were really straightforward and really common sense, but they shifted something in my head. I started to think of things a little bit differently, and we were given some steps basically to kind of manage that anxiety that you have before you speak in front of people. That I thought, you know what, I could do this. And Lynn Parker at the end, when we were all saying our goodbyes, was like, okay, so what are you going to do about comedy now? And I had no plans for comedy. I just wanted to be better in my day job. And I was like, oh, what are my plans for comedy? So I went off with this idea in my head, and I took to Twitter, because that is how I do that. I live my life. I took to Twitter and I tweeted, and I put it on Facebook as well. I didn't leave anything to chance. How does, something stupid, how does one become a stand-up comedian? I've done a course. And funny enough, very few people had any practical suggestions on that. So people agreed that it was a good idea. They're like, oh, you should definitely do this, Vix. But nobody had any leads really into how you got into it. So I was like, well, I've tweeted about it once. I've put up a Facebook status. I've done all I can. It's not meant to be. I've literally done all I can. I've really put the work in here. And no, apparently the universe had something else for me. So Mark Watson saw that tweet 14 years after we'd first met, probably. Yeah. They were 10 years, it's 14 years now. And tweeted me back and said, do you want to come and get over this phobia of public speaking by learning stand-up at my 26-hour show? And I said yes. I was in severe, I won't go into details, but I was in digestive distress the whole run up. Nothing solid was happening there. The anxiety of not only having to speak in front of a sold out audience in the Pleasance of all places, but in front of a comedy hero, loads of comedy heroes. It felt like the scariest thing in the world. And it was quite a lonely experience for it to be scary, because it sounds like an absolute dream come true for most people. So nobody really understood why I was making such a bloody fuss about it. Right. But I went on my own as well, because I couldn't find anybody else that wanted to spend 26.2 hours in a room with me and 100 others. I know loads of people now. I found my people, but at the time I could not find anybody who was prepared to commit to this. It started at, I think, 9 42 or some, it was a really random time, 9:42 in the evening, went all the way through to midnight the next day. And it got to about 2. So I was in a high state of anxiety for about 5 hours as the show went on. But over time, I'd come to the conclusion that it had been forgotten. And I started to enjoy it. And that was a mistake. And and I just got called up on stage. Like every now and again, there'd be somebody, Mark would send me off with somebody to do a lesson. So my first one was with Lulu Popplewell.
Okay.
Who took me through basically how to mine your life for material. So we had half hour together, and then I had to go up on stage with Lulu and talk about what we talked about. Ian Stone did a little lesson for me live on stage, which was really fun because he was on his way to do his radio show at about 6 a.m. So they got me on stage to chat to him. It was very sort of Rufus Hound wrote a set for me in my notebook that I've still got somewhere in the house. And it was just, that was right. And, more importantly as well, that's where I met Tom Tuck for the first time, who became quite an important person in my life in general, just because he's an all-around brilliant person. But in terms of what happened next, because I did that and I got through it and I had a brilliant time. It definitely fired me up to want to be a bigger part of this, a more professional part. I saw the kind of life that I wanted to lead. Funny enough, Rich Wilson was also in the room. Okay. But we didn't meet that day. But we were all in the same room together, who became one of my best mates further down the line. But it was a really weird day for the life that I was going to end up leading. But a couple of weeks later, Tom DM'd me and said, because he'd gone through my 5-minute set with me. He was so tired as well. But he saw me in the corridor scribbling away on this 5 minutes that I was supposed to perform on stage, and spent a good half an hour going through construction of jokes, like the bits that were good, the bits that were bad, the bits that needed fleshing out. He was just such a generous person, and that I've been taking advantage of that for 3 years. But he DM'd me on the day that he wanted to book me and said, do you want to come and do ACMS tonight? Because I think he knew if he'd given me a run up to it, I probably would have bottled out. Right. Okay. So he said, come and do 5 to 7 minutes tonight on stage. Yeah. And it was at the Phoenix. So again, it was like ridiculous venues to have played. So I'd been on stage at the Pleasance, I was at the Phoenix, and I got paid for it. My first gig, and it was rubbish. It was really bad. It was really, really bad. But loads of people there had also been part of the marathon show, so they were delighted to see me having a go. Yeah. And they kind of adopted me then. I got adopted into this brilliant community of alternative, weird, supportive, brilliant people. Yeah. So that was the start of everything. And Mark kept in touch and would check in with me. So it was nice to have a push to go and do some of the gigs that I was doing. So when I was going to do gig 10 and I was really tired, everyone at work had just started drinking on a Friday night, and I was going to do an open mic where it's probably going to be 3 people. It was really hard graft, but knowing that I could kind of check in with comedy heroes and just go, so I did my 10th gig today, kind of kept me motivated on it. But yeah, so it's quite an unusual path in. Yeah. But probably couldn't have worked that any other way. No. Is that a consistent story that you've had this select group, and you've mentioned a few names there that you can talk to, you can fall back on? Has that been consistent since that point, where you just can always go back to certain people or new people who've sort of come into your circle? The community kind of already exists, and it's a little bit like a sixth form in ways, in that there are sort of less sort of confrontational than when you're in school, where everybody's kind of against each other. But there are definitely, I'd say, sort of little tribes of comedians. Yeah. And my heart tends to sit with the more alternative comics, because it's the style of comedy that I love. But unfortunately, it's not the style of comedy that I write, which is endlessly disappointing to me. I'd love to be a little bit cooler than just telling my personal weird stories about my family. It feels quite, occasionally I feel like I'm the most middle of the road thing on some of the cooler gigs that I do. But when you have a style of comedy, is it informed by you, or do you seek out that style of comedy and say that's the comedian I want to be? I mean, you've touched on it there, not going the alternative route, but do you get to choose it, or does it choose you? I think you probably start as more of a pastiche of all the comedians that you love. So I think you borrow heavily, even if you don't mean to, because subconsciously you've got used to, because like Eddie Izzard is my favorite comedian, probably overall for my whole life, because she has been this consistent presence since I was about 12 or 13. I deconstructed the toaster sketch for my English language A-level, looking at all the differences in the voice and the tone and how the words were used to sort of the best dramatic effect. So I've kind of been intrinsically linked to Eddie Izzard for a long time. And what I didn't realize in my first iteration of my 5-minute set, I do something about European squat toilets that felt very well formed compared to some of the other stuff in my sets. And it was basically by accident a tribute version to Eddie Izzard's, because it was something I'd experienced myself. So it came, it was kind of parallel thinking in that I was on this Italian holiday and I thought, well, this is a French farce of a situation. I can talk about this on stage. But the beats in it were very, it was only, I think I listened back to one recently. I was like, oh fuck, I heavily ripped that off by accident, but it was just in my head. I couldn't have told you that it had come, it's a bit of a remix, if you will, of an Eddie sketch. So but and just borrowing like techniques from people. So even like turns of phrase, like classic turns of phrase, like I shouldn't tell you their real name, but I will. Like it's, where you borrow bits and pieces that have worked for other people without. It's more of a tribute than I hope more of a tribute than a ripoff. But over time, it's been about marrying up how I write with how I then deliver the jokes. Because I got some feedback from a brilliant person who's been with me in the comedy industry for a long time. She was the one that gave me my opportunity to do the Alexandra Palace gig that I did. Even though it was a brand new comic. And as often happens, I'm the only person on the poster that nobody has a fucking clue who they are. So it's good fun. It's fun to be me. But
if your name is there among other names, then it's
pretty close. You must be funny, because otherwise, why would you be with these other funny people? It's brilliant. It's a scam. It's an absolute scam. But I did my set and I was pretty happy with it. Like I didn't get half the way through the set that I planned, because I hadn't accounted for 1,000 people laughing and letting that die off. Is you need to kind of double the time you leave for laughs. And I was having such a good time as well. The pauses were longer because I was just standing on the stage. So I never thought I'd do anything like that again. I felt like this is the peak moment for me as the main character. This is the end scene of the film. Is me doing comedy. So I was just enjoying it, just for like, this might never happen again, and I'm gonna just breathe and I'm gonna look at this and I'm gonna remember it for the rest of my life. But the feedback I got from the brilliant woman who booked me, she took the time to go over the technique and the delivery, and it was really positive. But she said that the jokes that I told didn't reflect the quality of my written stuff. So I do a little bit of writing for the Independent Voices column, for example. So I've written quite a lot. You can find little bits of writing from me all over the place. So I used to write for Standard Issue when it was a magazine. So she was like, basically, I'd like more of that voice. She's like, I understand who you are really clearly when I read a piece that you've written.
Right.
You need to find the spirit of that. In your comedy. And it was really revolutionary to hear, to be honest. I was upset at first, obviously, because nobody wants to do what you consider to be an average job or a job that doesn't do justice to you. But I kind of needed to hear it, and I basically ripped up. Well, you'll know this because you've seen a lot of my work. I kind of dropped a lot of stuff that I was doing and just wrote new things. And I enjoy the new stuff more, and it does the new stuff does feel a lot more like me. And I guess the show that I'm doing at the moment is almost, it's a mixture of the two. And I'd like, because basically I am both those people effectively. So I'm the person that wrote that early, very lightweight material where a lot of the stuff, because it's about pettiness, where it's all like, oh, cutesy, I do this petty stuff. But the sort of later iteration of it is more about, actually, I don't think this is like cutesy petty stuff. Maybe I'm a bit of a dick, but maybe I'm all right with it. So it's through a very different filter. It's less like lighthearted, like he, stole the toaster from the kitchen, and more like, I strategically made the decision to ruin this person's day. Like maybe I'm the problem. So it's a little bit darker in tone, I think, but still hopefully relatable. I don't want people to go away and think that I might hunt them down and do petty acts of aggression if they give me a 2-star review.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's sort of, and it's weird because I used to be really nervous doing this. Just at the start, I was nervous about getting on the stage, but I was a lot freer with the material. Like I wasn't afraid to just tell a story and see where it went. But the longer I've got into it, the more invested I've been in it being good. I'm nervous in a different way now. So I'm not nervous about going out and standing on stage. It's not the physicality of doing it. I'm now nervous that I'm not going to express myself in the same way, or it's not going to go well, or people will come away and they'll get the wrong impression of me. It's a different key of anxiety.
Is it more sort of nervous for the material than for yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Like I care more. It's less about I'm out here doing it, so if they like it, that's fine. But either way, I'm having a good time. So.
You're talking there about doing the course and about learning what's good and what's right for you. Have you found that you've learned any specific lessons, or have you developed any philosophies in your time that sort of go, well, I can pretty much say that this is gospel now because I've seen it so many times?
I guess just keep going. Like, don't dwell on, like, the trouble is you find this out relatively quickly. You're only as good or as bad as your last performance. So every time you step on stage, it's a new audience and a new mindset. You get a complete fresh page to start over. And it doesn't matter if you've absolutely killed the night before, you can, or even on the same night. I went to Berlin and did the same 7-minute set in 2 clubs on the same night. And I've never gigged. I did 1 gig in Amsterdam before lockdown, but 10 of the audience were my mates. So it was a false positive. Like, they had a brilliant time. They were just delighted that I was there. So I had no idea, going on my own with no reps in the audience, how my comedy would translate in another country. Yeah. So I was working over there, and I just on a whim kind of signed up for a couple of comedy nights. And because of my impressive CV, that even I don't understand why I've got it, I got on. They let me on. And the first one I did was incredible. I had the best time. I had a 7-minute set, but I probably only did 5 minutes. So I was riffing with the audience. I was being a bit cheeky about the act before, and they were really, really enjoying it. And I was like, these are my people. Yeah. I'm big in Berlin. This is me. I am cool. Tell the people back home I am cool, because Berlin's cool and they like me. I'm cool. Yeah. And then I went, and that was about 35 people in quite a small room. So it was a really intimate, cool gig with comedy fans. Earlier gig as well, so people weren't drunk. Then I went to an aircraft hangar place called Cosmic Comedy, which was a massive purpose, like the kind of venue that a small town would have as its main entertainment hub. It was massive. It was this really long room. It was high ceilings. It was a proper stage. I was really excited about it because they were recording all the sets professionally. I was like, brilliant. I haven't got a new set recorded. Yeah. This is going to be fucking great. Famous last words. Almost exactly the same set, and they hated it. Wow. They hated it. I mean, it wasn't dead silence, but it was tittering and pockets of laughter. Like nothing landed comprehensively for every single person. So in front of about 120 expats, a lot of US people. So maybe that was the thing. I'm not sure I'm a US comic, because they're a little bit more noisy and in your face. I've gone through a lot of excuses on my own behalf, and that's what I came to do. But it just died. I couldn't even find it. And the video's gorgeous, and I'm normally really self-conscious about how I come across, but I was happy with how I looked at it, which I very rarely am. I couldn't even find 20 seconds that was good enough to share. I went through, and I think I found a 7-second clip that I was able to put on Instagram, because I'd done it, and I wanted people to know I'd done it. They didn't have to know how badly it went. I don't know why I'm telling you, but I am. Well. It was harrowing, and I had to get to the end. And that's the thing, I guess, from an advice point of view. Yeah. You can't give up. You do have to keep digging. And I got a couple of jabs in at the end where things got better with a bit of material that was a little bit more universal. But when I was about 3 minutes in, I looked at my watch and I was like, how have I got 4 minutes left? This is the long, dark cocktail hour of the soul. And you get through it. Everything will end. This too shall pass. Like, you get through it. Came back to the UK, did my night in Limehouse, and everything was fine again. Like, you live and die on an individual basis every night, but that is the freedom of it. Yeah. And that's why you can't let one piece of material go. If you like it and an audience doesn't get it, you have to test it a few more times, because there's a chance that maybe they weren't your people. So yeah, it's quite liberating, but obviously it's scary as well, because it's you that people are judging. Like it's not even you hiding behind a work presentation or stats. It's all you. So if they don't like the material, they don't like you, and you kind of have to live with that. But I think that's been really useful for me as a human being, because I'm such a people pleaser as a rule. My DNA is people pleasing. So to come to terms with people not liking me and it being okay has been,
Well, the Beatles got their start in Berlin, and not everyone liked them at the beginning. So
well, they should try cosmic comedy. But no, it sounds like I didn't like it, and it's a brilliant club, because it's guys that set up a comedy night there, and it went so well they were able to just buy it, and they've turned it into this perfect venue, and it's got dry ice and, like I said, professional filming. It's got an audience of people prepared to be there, because it doesn't start until like 10:30, locked in for 2 to 3 hours, paying a decent amount of money. I think it's like an €11 ticket charge. They have smashed it. What they're doing with comedy is incredible, but I don't think I ever want to do it again personally. It's like the Gong Show. I recognize it's useful for some people, but it's not for me. That's another bit of advice. Don't feel like you have to do Gong Shows. I felt like I had to do them as a rite of passage, and I could have sat that out. I didn't need to ever go through that. Like the King Gong at the Comedy Store was one of the most brutal situations I've ever voluntarily put myself through, and I've had a 7-hour tattoo, so that is so something.
Gong shows have been almost universally decried by every comedian I've ever seen. I don't know why anyone does them.
Unless you're good at them, they're a real gateway to getting on a pro clubs. Like if you smash that room, you're a club comic basically, whereas I'm more of a long rambling comic. Like I did a tryout for the Glee Club in I think February of last year, this year, and it went really well for me. Like I was happy with that. I came up on stage, I was happy with it. It was a really great green room to be in. Maisie Adam was there, Matt Price was MCing. It was really chilled out, really lovely night. A proper dream to play Glee Club in Cardiff as well, which where I started being a comedy fan. It was unreal. I had the best time, but the feedback I got was my joke count wasn't high enough, because my setups are quite long for the payoffs, and they're worth it, but it's so one thing for me, because I graduated onto 10s quite quickly, and I did not look back at 5, because I can barely tell a single story in 5 minutes. But that's another piece of advice when you're a comedian: work on the 5. Even if you don't have to do 5s anymore, do 5 so you're good at them, because you get to my level and that's all you're offered as tryout spots. I had to do one at Frog and Bucket and it was a 5, and I was like, fuck, I don't have a 5. I barely introduced myself and I'd lost 2 minutes. I looked at the watch, I was like, Frog and Bucket was really cool though. That is such a cool venue to play. And again, a female run venue. What a legend. Jess at Frog and Bucket, an icon. So,
well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about female nights, females in comedy and female run comedy. You're a promoter yourself as well with your own comedy nights. So tell me, how did you go from, let's be honest, it's been a short time, you're already doing promotions, you're doing podcasting, broadcasting, as well as stand-up. There's many strings in your bow. Is there any strings yet unstrung that you haven't tried yet that you want to have a go at?
I guess I'm of the view, because I said I feel so grateful to be doing it, because I lived a very normal life. Like I did my PR job, I was earning decent money, I live in a nice house, I've got a nice husband, I've got pets. I had a really nice quality of life, but this glittery little path opened up in front of me and completely changed everything. Like, I didn't know I could love and be committed to anything as hard as this. It is the hardest I've ever worked on, the least rewarding thing in some ways that you could ever do, because it's a graft. For all the pictures you see, it is you leaving parties early or trekking across town like an hour and a half on public transport to do 5 minutes on stage to possibly an audience. You never know until you get there. So I did about 20 open mic gigs. Some of them were brilliant, really well run. Some of them were horrendous. But I thought in terms of giving acts an experience and a platform, I kind of wanted to create a comedy night that I would like to go to, where there was,
Yeah.
somewhere where comics could sit and make their notes, where maybe you get a free drink for being part of it, where it was warm, where the audience was nice, where it felt safe. So I started my own one just because I needed to practice as well. And my local pub let me. That's the long and short of it. I drunkenly asked them one bank holiday weekend, why don't you do comedy here? There's a room upstairs. And they said, do you want to do comedy? And I said, yes. So then I DM'd Jen Brister, absolutely battered drunk, and said, I want to run a all-female lineup in my local pub. Will you come and be the headliner for me? And I had what was probably the first of several reverse auctions that I've had with pro comedians, which is why none of them have got any money, because my day job paid quite well. So I offered her what I thought was a reasonable amount of money for her time. And she was like, that is too much money. I was like, what? She's like, no, that's too much money for the day that you're asking for. And so I was like, well, what about this then? And she's like, no, that's still too much money. I was like, how are we? What? This is the weirdest thing I've ever been involved in. And then Rich Wilson did exactly the same thing, like basically told me off for offering that money, because he was like, who took that money? They've ripped you off, like properly straight away, protective older brother style. Like before we'd even met, this was on Facebook Messenger when I was trying to book him. It was like, who told you? Who told you that's what you should pay? Like outraged on my behalf. But so yeah, I ran a few nights and they went well. The first couple were, and this is the thing, like I got into a bit of an argument with the promoter that made me do 100 gigs without even knowing that they inspired that. So I should thank them really, because they really leveled me up pretty quickly. Also said that it cheapened comedy when new comedians tried to set up their own nights, because people would come along to our amateur efforts and then they wouldn't want to pay for the actual good nights that were set up, which is
okay.
Because and I got questioned quite heavily on why do you think you'd be a good promoter? What makes you think you could do it? And I was like, well, I've been working in marketing and PR for 15 years. What are your promotion credentials, actually? And I kind of agree. Like looking back, I will. I won't start arguments, but I'll finish them. But I kind of agree. I can see where he was coming from in the rationale that a lot of people who aren't maybe getting booked for the gigs they want will set up their own night. And it's quite an easy currency as well as a comedian to have your own night to offer when you're bartering to be on nights with other people. But that's how all these bringers have popped up, where you have to bring a hostage to be able to perform. And, they have a purpose, but often if you're having to run a bringer long term, it's because there's not a natural comedy audience there for you. And those people aren't the best audience to test jokes on. If they're just there as a favour to a mate, or they're another comedian being brought so they can bring you, which is the kind of deals that go on. Like there's nothing worse than 30 comedians that are all focused on their own set or nonplussed and not interested because they're not there to enjoy comedy, because it's just it's a work night. So I kind of took his point on board, but just like everybody who thinks they're a main character, I did not think it applied to me. So the first couple were definitely mostly friends and family, but a lot of them came back. And not because they were supporting one of my many ridiculous ventures, but they genuinely enjoyed it. They discovered comedians they wouldn't have seen before. They started supporting those comedians. So I know a lot of people went to see Jen Brister afterwards because they'd message me and say, I've just been to see Jen Brister at Streatham. Or, it opened a lot of people's eyes, my friends' eyes, to comedy when they weren't comedy fans. And I love that as well. It's nice being an evangelist for stand-up. And it worked. It was a monthly gig. It was going really well before the pandemic, and in the cracks between lockdowns I was able to keep it going, because the pub was fully on board. We tried to do one in the garden. We had 2 complaints to the council, so we had to come in and do it social distance. So it was like 10 tickets in the room basically, but comedians were so desperate to perform that we were able to run, and they were some of the best nights that I think I've done. We had like Sean Walsh in a room so small you'd never see him do that again. Like, it was properly weird old times to be alive. But it's been really enriching. I've enjoyed the promotion elements a lot, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get the kind of audience that I don't want to book acts unless I can guarantee. It's a lot of money. I don't make money on any of them. They probably cost me about £100 each in the end, because I buy rounds of drinks as well, and I'm downstairs going, does anyone want chips? But
I think you're your own worst enemy then, aren't you, in the money making front?
Yeah, I don't mind though. Like I said, up until like the last few months where everything became more expensive, I was on such a nice even keel with my day job that I was quite happy to take a loss.
Yeah.
Because I loved it and I enjoyed contributing to the comedy scene. So where possible, when I started my podcast, I paid people to come on it because I had the money. I wasn't spending it on anything else. My salary was decent. I had the money. I was able to say, look, for half hour of your time, come and do this for me. And it's just been, it was nice to be connected to those people. It was lovely to have them in the room. So it was always well worth it. But the last few months when energy bills started to go up and the interest rates have gone up, all of my repayments for everything have gone up. And all of a sudden, I don't have any money. So I'm having to look at, from a promotions point of view, how much of that kind of free work I can do, putting nights on.
Yeah.
And start treating it like a job, because I do like a cheeky glass of wine, even when I'm on the bill somewhere, because you're in a pub. So that has to stop. That has to stop. I can't afford it.
Do you find your experience as a stand-up and or promoter has been different based on gender?
Yeah, I think so. It's, as a comedian, particularly female comedian, you often find yourself you're delighted when there's another woman on the bill, when it's like a 4 or 5 act night, still to this day. And everybody's always got a good reason why their night doesn't have like, oh, we booked these women, they dropped out and only this straight white man was available. And I get that as a promoter, because, you know, a lot of the lineups do shift, particularly if you're running new material where it's free, even right up to the minute that they are due to be on the show. If they get a paid gig, they absolutely should take it. So I never really hold people to any kind of new material spots, because I totally get that they need to make the most money in the most efficient way to be able to survive. But so there are scenarios where probably the planning, they meant in the planning stage to have representation, but it's depressing that it is still seen as representation. I think that you are like, oh, I've ticked the box. I've got one woman on, I've got one BAME act, tick. Or, you know, if you can get a woman who was also that, tick, brilliant. That's both boxes cut. And now for straight white men. And I think, you know, it's not just promoters and comedians that are the problem. I think the problem is that if you ask your average audience, unfortunately, because they've not seen enough female comedians to get the diversity of the range. Because like, you don't, like, 4 men could dress almost identically, come out and talk 4 different versions of their own banal truth. So it's 4 women, and then Jason Manford came on and said, oh yeah, why don't we make the doors of Greg smaller so fat people can't get in? Like, nobody's walking away from that gig going, oh, men aren't funny. But when you are the only woman on a bill of 4 men doing material that you're familiar with, material that you're comfortable with, material you've seen on telly, because that they are the voices you hear on telly, you know that as comedy, it's almost subversive to have a woman, and you don't trust it immediately. You're braced for maybe they're going to talk about something. Oh no, maybe they're going to talk about periods, and you know, it's fine though. It's fine to talk about that, because that is something that affects 50% of the population. But even women are the worst offenders in audiences for coming up at the end going, I don't normally like female comedians, but you were really funny. And I was like, what do you mean you don't like female comedians? Like, all of us? You've seen every single one? Because I find that hard to believe. Like the range you get.
For sure.
Yeah, it's mad that you are on a bill and you sort of feel like you are carrying the reputation of female comedians if there's a lot of men on and you're the only woman, because that is, they'll go, well, the weakest act tonight, the woman one, obviously. It would be nice for it not to be a point to prove or disprove, like this women aren't funny thing, but it is very much, I think it's kind of programmed into us. Like, everybody knows, like, even in like family groups, I did some research on this for my day job, and both men and women unanimously agreed that their dad was the most funny person that they knew. Like, men thought they were the funniest person in their own life, whereas women never said that. And it's like, you kind of forget that women who go out in groups together, we're not sitting there in silence. We're normally, you know, that's the trope. It's women on a hen night absolutely cackling, like hysterically with each other. We've all got it in us to be funny. It's not a gendered thing. So I think it's almost how we're brought up as much as anything. I think it's a very complicated thing. And you can see why promoters sometimes put all male acts on, because maybe they don't sell the tickets with all female acts on. So I feel like the responsibility is with everybody, but I think it's with the bigger, like TV. I think TV really needs to be doing some heavy lifting in normalizing women in comedy. And queer voices and non-binary voices, like bringing that to the forefront so people do feel more comfortable with it when they're in a club and they see these names on the bill.
Yeah.
And there's that endorsement. If people have been on TV, you feel like, oh, they must be good. So you go into it with a different mindset, somebody you've never seen before, where you're sort of braced in case they might be rubbish. So I think everybody, it's not as simple as everybody just promising to have 3 men, 3 women, 2 non-binary people, 2 disabled comedians. Like, it's not as simple as all taking a list and ticking a box, but we can still all do that anyway.
Yeah.
It won't solve the problem, but if we're not part of solving the problem, we are the problem.
Yeah.
So I think you can see why everybody who runs their own small night thinks, why should I make the effort to do this when nobody else is? But if we all think like that, nothing will change. So I've thought about this a lot.
Yeah. What about comedy for you? Because now that comedy is for you is kind of part of your work day, do you still have comedy as a leisure activity? Do you go and see live comedians? Do you watch them on the TV?
Yeah, I'm so bad. That's what I do on my days off. I go and see other people's shows. I had a whole week of comedy a couple of weeks ago, and I saw Paul McCaffrey on the Monday in Soho Theatre, and then I saw Stamp Town on the Friday because Jordan Gray was headlining it. And it was so good. I loved this. And Julia Massley, and I'd never seen Viggo Venn before. And then a couple of days later, because Viggo Venn mentioned that he was doing a work in progress at the Bill Murray in a couple of days. So I went to that as well. Me and my friend Leslie, who's also a comedian, ended up going to the late night. We did a open mic that I hosted, and the show was at 11, and there was a tube strike on. So we got the bus to the Bill Murray to go and see his show at 11. I still love it as much as I ever did. I think it's an absolute joy to be on the bill. I'm always one of the people like fighting my way out of the green room to try and watch it from the back. It's very surreal and exciting. I never get bored of it. And I love discovering new acts as well. I genuinely get such a buzz out of seeing people do well that I've seen in smaller gigs with me. Like Dan Tiernan's one at the moment. He is absolutely phenomenal. He's everywhere at the moment, and it's really exciting to see because he did the Edinburgh Fringe show before Comedy Arcade that I was on last year, and he ran over every day. The man cannot keep time, but you can't even be mad at him. You can't even be mad. We got on so well that it cost me about 10 minutes of my prep time every day, but you could see the talent he had. And I was unlucky enough to go on after him at Leicester Square New Comedian of the Year, and I might as well have just laid down on the floor and just rolled around crying rather than do my 5-minute set, because he took it up so high because the set just built and built and built because he's really high energy, and I do not have any of that. I'm trying to be more physical in my comedy at the moment, but I am just a girl standing in front of a microphone, and I genuinely had to open with, do you know what? I hate that I have to go after him as well. Goodness sakes. He was really good. Like, vote for him. You will vote for him. But yeah, there's nothing like it when you're standing waiting to go on. I don't do competitions anymore for that reason, because like it's so subjective and comedy's so different that I knew I didn't have a chance in hell. And to be honest, that was a set where I actually quite enjoyed. I thought I'd done the best I could do as well. I was like, genuinely, that was a solid 5 from me, and it completely wasn't good enough because the guy before me was so good. So yeah, it's fun when you see those people that you know have got it, and you're just like, I'm going to see them again. And he's just been signed, I think, to either Blue Book or one of the big agents, and it's so deserved. And it's really nice when you see people who work really hard get successful as well, and I think I see it more in comedy than in any other area of life, really, because Pope Lonergan's book is out at the moment and it's getting rave reviews everywhere. I can't think of anybody more deserving, because he's genuinely one of the kindest people I've met in comedy. Really supportive. He used to put me up for gigs when I was a new comedian. He's always sort of putting the ladder down for other people. He came and did a work in progress with me, and Ashish Suri, who's another one who's doing really well at the moment. And there were only 3 people in the room. And he performed it, and I was mortified because I'd invited him along to do it, and he performed it like there was a proper audience in, because everyone's and that's something you do learn from the real greats, I think, that everyone is a proper audience. Like, whether it's 2 people or 1 person, they've paid their money or they've just given you their time, and you owe them more than saying, oh, there's normally more people in the room than this. And I think those are the true masters of it, that just go, okay, I don't even need the microphone. I can just sit here. There's 3 of you, gather round. We'll treat it more like a conversation. And like those are where I've really felt like I've learned from bigger comedians. They're in smaller rooms like that, where for whatever reason, tube strike, off the beaten track, promised them by the promoter that they didn't promote. Like they are the places where I really have learned the most. And Pope was like that. He just put on such a show for these 3 people in the audience. It was like, I want to be like that. I want to feel, I want anybody, whether it's one person at Edinburgh Fringe who's taken the chance and come to see me, or 1,000, I want them to walk away feeling like they didn't waste their time. So yeah, he's great. I'm so glad that his book is doing so well.
Excellent. So has there been a moment for you that sort of stands out in your mind as just a scene that you never thought you'd see and that you're suddenly a part of, that you thought, my God, this is the pinnacle of everything that's happened?
Yeah, I would say it's probably that Leicester Square Theatre gig that I did, that I got to MC. And it was because, like you said, it's a lot of things are haphazard. I got approached by this brilliant charity called Women and Children First, who do lots of work in developing countries about empowering communities to take control of medical things that should be solved by now. Like we've got the technology, we've got the medicine, so empowering people to do something about that in their communities, rather than sort of parachuting in like saviors, we're here to rescue you. So it's a really cool charity, and this lovely man called Mark got in touch with me. Mark's a typically good in comedy. Mark's, I think, as a rule. I've had a really good run of Watson, Comedy Nerd, Mark Mina from Women and Children First, and he got in touch and said, I'm doing this comedy show at Leicester Square Theatre. I'm looking for an MC, and I was hoping that you'd do it. And I looked up the lineup of the one before, and it was a phenomenal lineup. And I can't remember, it was someone like Susie Ruffle as the MC of the year before. I was genuinely convinced that he had approached me by mistake, that he thought I was someone else. I was like, do you think I'm Amy Gledhill? That has happened before. So I genuinely thought, he's got the wrong end of the stick here, but I'll say yes, because fuck it. That's what a straight white man would do. I was like, yes, yeah, sure, I can't wait. And then he started following me on Twitter. And I was like, so he does know who I am, because but I still wasn't confident. I was like, maybe I'll just be a reserve, and then if a real big name comedian comes along, then they'll do it. Because all the names got announced. So it was James Acaster, Cindy V, Mike Wozniak, Olga Koch, Nathan Caton. As the names were sort of being revealed to me by Mark, who was just keeping me up to date on it. And then the poster came out and went live. And I was like, okay, my face is on the poster. This is definitely on. I can talk to friends and family about it now. But I finally got up the courage to say to him, I was just like, can I just ask you a quick question? Because obviously you know all the other people from telly. Yeah. How did you find me? And he said he'd seen a clip of me online somewhere, and he'd looked at my website, watching the videos on my website, and he liked me. So he gave me a chance. Even though I was not a big crowd draw, that was the kind of vibe he had. It was his gigs put together. He was a massive comedy fan. Yeah. And it was really cool we met up, and we talked through all the charity stuff, but it was really cool to be there on the night, because he's a comedy fan and he loves the charity so much. He's so deeply ingrained into it. He really wanted the night to go well. And obviously, because it was like a career high for me, I really wanted it to go well as well. So it felt like we were a bit of a team. Yeah. And there was this moment where we were standing behind the curtain, and I bullied him into announcing me onto the stage, because there'd been no plan for that. So they wanted me to announce myself on the offstage mic. It was like, I don't even know if I can say words. I was like so excitable. I was like, I might walk out in front of the mic and just go into it, or look down and I'll be naked. But so I managed to get him, and he was really nervous about doing the offstage mic, and in that way where something gets sprung on you. And we just stood there, and I was like, look, Mark, if you can do this, I can do that. Yeah. And it was unreal. It was unreal to be in that green room. It was, the whole thing was ridiculous. Yeah. It was such a privilege, and I genuinely thought, life probably is not going to get much better than this. But I thought that last time I had a big gig, so I'm prepared to be surprised.
Well, let's talk about your show then, the solo show. You're taking it to Edinburgh. What's it called? When's it on? What's it all about?
More fiction than girls. So like I said, it kind of covers off like the versions of myself that I kind of live with every day, and them coexisting. So how I present myself to the world versus what's going on inside my head at those given moments. I'm really excited about it. It's at Just the Tonic, the Mash House. So it's the attic. Yep. which is a small enough room that hopefully if there are only a couple of people in every day, we're going to have a good time. It's not going to feel, I don't want the audience to feel pressured to have like to be really big for me. So if it is that kind of vibe, then we'll all be fine, I reckon.
I like the Mash House. It's a good venue.
Yeah, some big comedians have gone through that room and gone on to bigger things. So it's hallowed ground, to say the least. So I'm excited about that. That's 2:40, so that's in the afternoon. Yep. And then at 11:20, through a series of unfortunate incidents that somehow ended really well, I'm at Underbelly Bristow Square with my podcast, Comedy Arcade panel show. So yeah, late night mayhem in a really flashy venue. I thought I was doing it free fringe, but my free fringe venue, they lost the room that they booked me into, and then they couldn't give me an equivalent time slot or venue in the local area. And so Underbelly stepped in.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Made me an offer I couldn't refuse because I had no other offers. And but yeah, so that's quite a surreal pinch moment as well, to be in one of the big four venues. So I'll be in the brochure with like the Pleasance people. Like, it's just I do this in my house, in my kitchen table.
for the tiny small group of people who don't yet know what Comedy Arcade is, can you give us a synopsis?
Yes, so it's comedians and interesting people, so it's not always comedians, competing to tell the best story from a random topic that I generate from a bingo ball. So for the podcast, normally it's 3 comedians that you'll hear voices of. For the live shows, I tend to go 4 because it's less pressurized for people to come up with something fun on the spot, and also because the conversation can be a little bit more raucous, so I don't have to worry about editing it. So yeah. So it's four people. We've got Rich Wilson is doing every single one.
Of course.
At Edinburgh Fringe, because he is my Alan Davis to my Sandy Toksvig. So he's there, like my anchor, doing every one, stopping me from going mad. And he has done so much. His life has been so bloody ridiculous and busy that he's got a story for everything. I don't think I've heard the same story more than twice in about 50 shows that we've done together, like live and on the podcast. So yeah, he's a good anchor.
Would you like to make a wager now how many times he's going to try and mention Rumpelstiltskin?
It's banned. And his sauna story. It's banned. He's not allowed to tell it anymore. His new show is going to be phenomenal, though. I've seen some of the work. He's really put a lot of heart into it. He's such a great club comic that he can get away with murder, and he doesn't need to sit down and write stuff because he's just got it. But he's put the work in this year. I think it's going to be his best show yet. So I'm really excited to see it. And I've got Jenny Ryan doing 2 of the 3 weeks as well from The Chase, because she came on a November show as a guest and just never left. So, which is brilliant. She is so much fun. She's another person that's got all these brilliant stories. She's a natural conversationalist as well. So she keeps the chat going, and you need those people that are not selfish, that will sometimes ask the question that needs to be asked, that keeps the conversation moving, and they don't need to sort of hog the mic. And those people are very special. So Tom Tuck is doing ACMS as part of his run, which clashes with the show. So hopefully he'll do a couple, because he was episode 1 official. He was one of my first ever players. And he's been a brilliant sport. Like I said, it's just been the person that just crops up every now and again, like a kind of comedy fairy godfather, just keeping me on the straight and narrow. So yeah, the guests we've got booked are insane. Mark Watson's going to do a couple. Got Scott Bennett, Alison Spittle, Sakisa, Charlie George. It's unreal that people have said yes. I do not understand it. Like I said, in my mind, it's just a silly idea I had when I was drunk all the time in lockdown. I can't understand how it's got this out of hand. The next episode's got Rufus Hound on it, who wrote in my book on my first show. So it feels like quite a nice full circle moment to have him back.
Oh, fantastic. Well, it sounds like it's going to have some fantastic shows. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I'm going to be there for a week, and I've put in as many comedy arcades as I can. And of course, your show.
Different show every time, isn't it? So
I've seen it a number of times live, and it's always fantastic. I've never not had a great night.
I think the Robin Morgan, Robin Ince Rich one was one of my favourites, because you were at that one in the Water Rats for Camden Fringe.
That was a lot.
And unfortunately, Steve Bennett from Chortle was in as well. So that's how I got my review. But I was so lucky. 4 stars. Absolutely smashed it. Yeah, it's one of those things that nobody claims to read Chortle until they've got a review that's good, and then all of a sudden they acknowledge that everyone's secretly reading Chortle because it's like our sixth form magazine. We're all reading it. We need to just come out. We're reading it. We're listening.
Fantastic. Okay, so finally then, for me, please, Vix Leyton, can you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
It's it's beyond description, but I know that's cheating, isn't it? It's one of the single tracks of the album that is Life that you will keep coming back to. So
I like that.
It's the Mr. Bright side of my life as a
nice.
It just underpins everything. I think if you approach things with humor, you will have a nice time even when you're having a dreadful time. So
yeah, what a lovely poetic way to put it. I like that. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. This has been such a joy. I love talking about comedy. I'm such a nerd for it. So.
That's my job, to be the nerd. Okay.
I know. Sorry about that.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, as it always is, to talk with you. I appreciate you coming on the show. Fantastic.
Thank you for having me. See you later. Bye.